What is up, guys, and welcome back to Electrix Moto. Today we're going to be talking about a bike that doesn't get as much press as other bikes, the Throne Serpent. I know a lot of people have asked us a lot of questions about this bike, and this is our shop bike. We have been able to get several parts to fit on this bike that not a lot of people realize fit this bike. So today we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of the Throne Serpent, and then go through a parts list so you know what fits if this is the bike that you have in your garage. So for those of you who don't know about the Throne Serpent, its current version, or at least the version that we have here in the shop, is the 10 kilowatt version. And 10 kilowatts realistically for the price that you pay is kind of unbeatable right now in the current market with how tariffs impacted prices. A lot of companies raise prices and never drop them down. It's kind of been a bit of a debacle, but the Throne Serpent did increase in price when the tariffs happened, and then it came back down once they were lifted. So I have to give kudos to the Throne Serpent guys just for taking the time to reduce the price back down so people can get into an affordable bike. It seems like every 6 months or so, or every year, this market starts to get more and more expensive, and before we know it, we're going to be at the standard OEM prices for like Yamaha, Suzuki. Just, you know, a $10,000 bike is going to be kind of normal. I hope that doesn't happen, but realistically, that's just where the market is trending to. And as better and better bikes come out, they get more and more expensive. Now, this is the 10 kilowatt version. We also have the 13 kilowatt version that was just released. But today we're just going to talk about the 10 kilowatt version. It also has a 40 amp hour battery. So 10 kilowatts, 40 amp hours, the original Throne Serpent before it got increased to the 13 kilowatts. Now, the bike as a whole has, some would say a con and some people would say a pro, but there's just things I want to talk about, and you can make your own judgment on what you think the bike is or isn't. So one thing that you will notice is in the saddle of this bike, the whole frame is a lot wider than like an E-Ride Pro or a Sur-Ron Lite B. And the reason I mention those bikes is because that's where this competes kind of in the power ratio. You're really close to an E-Ride 2.0. You're a little bit more than the stock Sur-Ron Lite B. So, but you have a much wider saddle and a much longer seat. So those could be cons or those could be pros. For me, it's a pro because it feels more like a motorcycle. As you can see, this comes up to right at where my hip meets my bones in here. So you have a little bit taller of a seat height, you have a little bit wider of a saddle, a little bit better of a stance, and it's the most comfortable seat there is right now. So if you're somebody who just does a lot of neighborhood riding, you just want something to cruise around the streets on, you don't really care about hitting any crazy trails, and seat and comfort is something that you want, this is definitely a bike that you would probably want to consider because it is the most comfortable that I've ever ridden. I don't sit down a ton, but when I do, it's nice to have a comfortable seat to do it in. And then there are some other features that this bike has that other bikes don't have. If you take the seat off, the way the battery is connected or braced inside the bike, it has this metal bracket that kind of keeps the battery in place. If you have an E-Ride Pro 2.0 or any of the E-Ride products, that battery moves just a little bit in there and it starts to create little abrasions on the side of the battery case. I don't know how big of a deal that is, but long term, you're probably going to continue to rub through that battery case, and that could become a problem. With this bike, you do have this battery bracket that just holds everything in place. Now, the other thing that's definitely different from other companies is the way that their battery, positive and negative, connects to the top of the battery itself. It has this locking mechanism where you can lock it down, it clicks into place, and it holds that battery connector on the terminal, so you don't have to worry about it rattling loose. That was an issue we had recently on our Sur-Ron Ultra B. We put in an 80 amp hour battery. We were on the trail for a while and the battery cable ended up rattling loose. So it's just little things like that that are really nice. Another thing that we like about the bike, this doesn't make it better, faster, or anything like that, is the side lights. When you press the Throne Serpent button on your throttle side, it gives you like a crown side light, like it shoots down and it displays a crown on the ground. It's kind of cool, doesn't really do much for you, but it is cool. Another thing we like about these bikes is the already painted frame. A lot of people powder coat their frames, and it's not like an easy job. You gotta take the whole bike apart, you gotta have it powder coated, you gotta put it all back together. It's not something you can do in a day, and having a bike that you can pick the color of makes things realistically nice to do. So if you're looking for something with a little bit more flair, or you want something that has a little bit more color to it, not just an all black bike like all the bikes on the market, this bike is definitely something to consider. Let's talk about the suspension real quick. You do have the KKE suspension, which is the same exact suspension that comes on your Throne Lightbee. It's fine, it's great, it works. It's nothing special, but you don't have to worry about any issues. I really like when lesser known brands use parts that are manufactured and placed on bikes that are really well-known brands, because it adds a little bit of legitimacy to the bike itself. So when you see KKE components on a bike, you kind of know what you're getting, which is like you're in the safe zone. You're by no means outperforming EXT or the really, really good brands, but you know you have a fork and a shock on this bike that's going to stand up to some beating, and you know it's comfortable. You know exactly what you're getting, which makes everything a lot more comfortable when buying a bike that you may not know a ton about. If I'm being honest, there are some things that are really good ideas, but the problem is it prohibits the aftermarket. It's not that you can't overcome them, it's just when this bike comes to your door, whether it's assembled or in a box, there are some things that you can't do. So if you see on this bike, we do have a Warp 9 bar mount with gold Warp 9 bars. That's simple enough. However, because the way these controls on both your throttle and non-throttle side are installed on the Throne bike, they have a screw that comes up through the bottom of the assembly into the handlebars. So, and that's what holds this in place. If you see right now, I can move this around because there's nothing really holding it in place. Most manufacturers use a clamp style so you can put any bars on that you want. But these bars come with a pre-drilled hole with a bolt screwed into them that holds these. And it holds this side too, the throttle side. So that is a fantastic idea because it keeps these controls from moving around on you. However, if you want to add aftermarket bars, you have to make an extra step in the process. So in order to make this work, what we had to do is we had to mark and drill out the handlebars and then use a tap and die kit to create a thread. Obviously, I did not put those bolts in yet because I wanted to show you how these controls move around. But the point being is, it's a great design. The problem is that you can't just go slap a set of bars on and it takes you 10 minutes. You gotta bust out your drill, you gotta bust out your tap and die kit. You have to make the proper adjustments to make these bars work, which we did, which doesn't take us very long. But not everybody has a shop that with all the proper tools to make that conversion. So if you're looking for bars and you want a set of these bars, we are going to put Warp 9 bars on the site with a pre-drilled hole and a pre-threaded hole that will fit the factory bolt that comes with both of these controls. That will make your life a lot easier. Doesn't mean you can't do it by yourself. However, that is something that we had to overcome in order to make this setup work, because when it comes to the base Electrix Moto package that we put on just about every single bike, it's important for us to be able to make those changes to put this bike in a better riding position for the way that we like to ride. To me, it seems like the bike wasn't thought all the way through. However, they are addressing these issues. The controller on the Throne Serpent has a square shape versus a rectangular shape. And there are no aftermarket controller options for this bike. I think when you build bikes like this from a factory's perspective, you need to have the ability to upgrade them, because people like to tinker, people like to customize and make a bike their own. So not having the ability to change this controller out to anything on the market right now kind of sucks, because you can't increase power. You could definitely take this bike's power up 3 or 4 kilowatts if you had the ability to put a new controller on it, but without that capability, it kind of leaves it dead at 10 kilowatts, which, you know, for me is, if this is the bike that I'm just cruising around the streets, if I'm doing hard, aggressive trail riding, this might not be the bike for me, but this bike does suit a lot of people. So the next thing that we always do, which I'm sure you guys are well aware of by now, is we put the drop pegs and the Warp 9 Elite foot pegs on every bike that we build for ourselves, and we try to do it for customers if that's what they want to do. This bike specifically, you can use the Warp 9 drop pegs, whether we just have the E-Ride Warp 9 drop pegs that are here, so that's what we put on this bike. They bolt up fine. The issue being is that there is a additional bracket that's underneath your foot peg mount that adds extra support, and you kind of just screw this long rod into one another, and it gives you a little bit of extra support underneath, so your foot pegs don't flex when you're hitting jumps or you're riding hard trails. That is just a little bit too short to span the entire frame of the bike, because as I said earlier, this frame is a little bit wider in the saddle, which means the whole frame all the way down is wide. That's not the biggest deal for us. We're gonna be fine riding it that way. We're comfortable riding it that way. If you're not comfortable riding it that way, by all means, don't grab these adjustable peg brackets from us or from anywhere. But for us, I don't see the rider weight that we have on this bike is going to be between 150 and 200 pounds. I don't see any issue, and we will definitely let you know if we have an issue with those aluminum brackets holding up on their own without that additional brace underneath. So that is something that you have to be cautious of. If you want to drop the foot pegs on this bike, you can, but you will have a little bit of distance between both of the drop peg brackets where that rod just doesn't fit appropriately. So you don't have that extra support, which is important, but it's not the end of the world. We're choosing to ride without it and to see how it holds up, and we'll report back our findings, or if you see that we blew a peg off on a next video, then you'll know that that's probably not the thing that you should do, but I feel fairly confident that it'll hold up just fine. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do, this takes a little bit of bush craftsmanship, I would say. So the KKE forks will fit a Sur-On 18-inch front wheel. It's the same spacing. The spacers match up perfectly. You can slide your axle through. The rotor matches up with the caliper. Everything is perfect. So the front wheel, you can get a KKE Sur-On front wheel to fit on this bike, no problem. Now we have a 16-19 setup from KKE that we're putting on this bike. And although the spacing is perfect in the rear as well, the problem is you're going to need to add about a 2mm spacer behind your rotor to bump it off of the hub. The reason for that is the way the bracket is positioned for your brake caliper, it doesn't go in line with that rotor. So you're gonna need to bump that out a little bit to make it fit. We did this on a customer's bike. He asked us to do it. It was all good. So we made that adjustment. He's been riding the bike like a maniac for a while now. So you can get a 16-19 setup on this bike as long as you buy KKE wheels. You just need to understand you are gonna have to add about a 2mm spacer behind your rotor on your hub to bump that rotor out just a bit to fall in line with the brake caliper. I'm hoping that that makes a lot of sense. It's something that we're gonna do. We're about to go put the wheels and tires on this bike today. But before we did that, I wanted to kind of walk through our thought process and what's possible with this bike before we just start pushing out videos and without really explaining how we achieved the things that we did. So before we wrap this up, I want to talk about a couple of more cons, and they're more aesthetic issues. For me, I just absolutely despise this front headlight. It doesn't work very well, it's not very bright, and I understand why they made the headlight the way they made it to match the contour of the bike, because the bike is a little bit wider. They put a front fender on it that flares out, and it's just not my favorite thing. So what we've done is we're going to remove this front headlight. We are going to toss on a regular front headlight that you would see on any other style of E-moto with a bracket that goes underneath the bar mount. And we're just gonna remove this light entirely. We're gonna just rewire it. It'll work fine. It'll still be able to use the hand controls. That's not a kit. You're gonna have to take that on yourself if you wanna do that, but we're just gonna replace this with an ODI number plate, simply because it just looks better. I think all these bikes look better that way than having this big motorcycle style headlight. It's just not my favorite thing. If you like it, keep it, that's fine. If you don't like it, you can remove it and put a number plate on there. I don't ride too much at night anyways, but we're just gonna put a light on just to put a light on in case we get caught in the dark at some point. It's nice to have. Another thing that we're gonna do from an aesthetic standpoint that I just despise on the Throne Serpent is this front fender. Like I just mentioned, the way it contours out around the forks is because there is a bar lock, like a motorcycle lock on this, on the triple clamp. And it requires that they made a little bit of adjustment to the front fender. So what we did is we just modified an E-Ride Pro 2.0 front fender or a 3.0 front fender. We drilled out a couple of additional holes. We made the spacing proper. So we're gonna just put an E-Ride front fender on this. I think that's just the best look for an E-moto. I think that's a really easy way to make this bike look a lot better because it's definitely noticeable when you're seeing it from the front that this is not just an E-Ride, or it's not a Sur-Ron, or it's not a Talaria. It is definitely different, which is cool. However, I just don't like that look whatsoever. So we're gonna change this bike to make it a little bit more aggressive for the way that we like our bikes to look. That may not work with you, and that's totally cool, but just giving you a little bit of information about how we're gonna do it. And if you wanna take that on yourself, it's totally doable with a couple of tools in about an hour of your time. All right, the last thing I wanna touch on is something that I've been kind of just disappointed with all the way around on all the E-motos these days. Is the brake systems. Now, granted, you do have 4 piston calipers on almost every bike now. You also have .4 fluid, but I think the .4 fluid is definitely better than mineral oil, without question. However, I think because we see bikes coming with .4 fluid, we think that the brakes are just going to be astronomically better, and realistically, they're still not. And that comes down to the type of brake pads that are being used on these bikes directly from the factory. They're just not good enough to slow these bikes down in the long term. The one thing that we replace the quickest on every single person's bike is the rear pads. And it happens oh so quick, and that's across every bike. It's not anything to do particularly with the Throne Serpent, but I would like to see a moto style brake on some of these bikes, not necessarily this bike because it doesn't come with the power to substantiate that, but things like the SR, having a Ultra B style brake on those bikes would literally change the game on how they perform, because you would have so much more braking power. And when we get into those 25 kilowatt bikes, I know I'm kind of veering off here, but when we get into those 25 kilowatt bikes, simple .4 brakes with a crappy pad, it's just not going to cut it. So just keep that in mind. It's not necessarily just this bike. It's kind of my gripe with the E-moto world as a whole, but it's better than it was, and I'm thankful that it is better than it was, but it's still not where we need to be, especially with the speed that these bikes are starting to come out with. Last thing before I forget, and I know I said last thing last time, if you are going to put the KKE 1619 wheels on this bike, you will need to order a Sur-Ron 220 millimeter rear rotor, because the bolt pattern on the Throne Serpent brake disc is different than the bolt pattern on the hub from KKE. That was a mouthful, kind of stumbled through it, but the point of what I'm trying to say is you will need to order that additional rotor to make the whole 1619 setup work for this bike. Okay, so you've heard me talk enough about this bike. I think the Throne Serpent really does fill a hole in the market for somebody who wants like a bigger feeling bike. There really isn't many bikes that feel this way out there. It handles really well. It definitely has that stink bug feel, and I think that's just because you got a 1919 setup, your handlebars are really low, the back of this seat is really high. There's a lot of things that kind of make you feel like you're leaning over, but from a value perspective and a power to value rating, it's one of the best that you can get. You get a warranty with it. You know, there's a lot of pros to having a Throne Serpent. Maybe not, it's not for everybody, maybe it's for you, maybe it isn't, but we're going to try to build this bike to the best that we can build it, take advantage of all 10 kilowatts that you get out of this thing, and see what it's actually capable of doing on jump lines, on harder trails, on small moto tracks, things like that, to kind of give you a comparison of this versus other bikes. And is this bike worth it to you? I don't know. It's just something you have to ask yourself. But if you guys have any questions, please leave those in the comments. If you guys are local to Columbus and you want to come to our new showroom, please just give us a call and stop by. We are by appointment only, and we can bring you in. You can kind of take a look around, just hang out, talk about E-motos, whatever you want to do, we're down to do. Lastly, the last episode of the podcast will also be in the description. If you guys like listening to more long form content, you got a long drive on the way to work in the morning, maybe this will help you get through it a little bit quicker. So I will see you guys on the next one.